Apologist Frank Turek has a lot of hot takes on Twitter that I think are worthy and really worthy of a critical refutation. Now, obviously, a tweet in and of itself is not a fully worked out, robust argument. Having said that, you shouldn't be tweeting things that are just absurd. And today, Turek posted a tweet on presenting a theodicy that I think really gets into the area of absurdity. So let's take a look and then I'll offer a quick reply. So Turek says, some people will say, well, why doesn't God stop all evil right now? If God were to stop evil at midnight tonight, would you still be alive at 12:01? I wouldn't be. You wouldn't be either. Why? We all do evil every day. Okay, there must be some hyperbole here, right? Because obviously, if I'm sleeping at 12:01, presumably I'm not actively committing evil while I'm sleeping, unless I'm maybe morally culpable for the actions I do in my dreams. And at that particular moment, I happen to be doing some evil thing in the dream for which God has warrant to annihilate me. But setting that aside, I mean, clearly, I think here at the charitable interpretation, there's at least some significant hyperbole here. God wouldn't have to annihilate every single person at the same moment because they're all evil. Unless, here's one second possibility, maybe Turek is really thinking about the imputed sin of Adam. So, simply in virtue of existing, we are all damnable creatures that should be annihilated. So, it's not even the acts of commission and omission of sin that we carry out, but rather our very existence as having the sin nature of Adam imputed to us that would warrant God annihilating us. I don't know if Turek thinks like that or not, but suffice it to say, this is a pretty problematic hot take. So let's debrief it now. Now, the first thing I want to say is, as I'm going to offer some further critical responses, almost inevitably there are going to be people saying, "Well, you're not steel manning Frank Turek." To which I'm going to say, I don't think Frank Turek is steel manning the objection he's responding to. If you want to be steel manned, first thou must steel man. Right? If you want to have to earn the honor of having your arguments treated with maximal strength, the first thing you have to do is treat the argument to which you're responding with maximal strength. And if Turek's going to begin by straw manning opposing arguments, well, then that undercuts the rationale, the basis, the motivation to steel man his rebuttal. Now, the actual content here of the tweet is really pretty striking. So the question is, the person says, why doesn't God stop all evil? And then Turek's response is, well, that would require him to annihilate all human beings. But of course, it doesn't require that. So this is where we get into the whole question of steel manning. The question is this, like, if a person is carrying out evil right now, why doesn't God stop that evil or prevent that evil from happening? The alternative is not to annihilate the person. Just think about it, right? If the police come and stop a crime in progress, you will notice that stopping the crime in progress does not require the police to annihilate the person carrying out the crime. All it requires is for the police to restrain the person from further carrying out of the crime. Likewise, I mean, unless Turk is claiming God can't do something that the police can do, otherwise God would be perfectly able to prevent crimes that are being carried out. And another thing to note is because God is omnipotent and has perfect foreknowledge, omniscience. Omniscience is not foreknowledge, but foreknowledge is part of omniscience, just to clarify that. And because he has that, God could orchestrate situations that would prevent certain evils from ever occurring. So, for example, Like a person, let's say they're driving drunk on the way home, and they're going to swerve into onto the sidewalk and to kill a pedestrian. And God foreknows that this is going to happen. So all God has to do is prevent their car from starting when they get into the car and they're drunk, for example, right? That's one thing God could do that would prevent this event from even occurring. And note that by preventing the car from starting, God would not have had to annihilate the driver. Right? He would simply have had to prevent the car from starting. One incident, but now there are millions of incidents like that every day where things happen that God could have intervened in through omniscience and omnipotence to prevent those things from occurring, and yet God allows them to occur. And in each case, God could have prevented that thing from occurring without annihilating every human being on earth. So then the question is, why doesn't God do that? And that's a perfectly reasonable question. The response that Turek gives us is, well, because that would require him to annihilate everybody, is just false. This is where I want to say that really that what these kinds of statements like people like Turek make here, and for which I think social media is actually a very effective platform to perpetuate this, is it's like what in the automotive world you call a 10-foot paint job. So it's a paint job on a car that looks good at a distance, but the further uh, you move toward the car, the closer you get, the more you see problems with the paint job. And so it's a good 10 footer, is what you say. It's a good 10-foot paint job. But it doesn't look good up close. It falls apart when you come up close because that's where you see the Bondo and you see the cracks and you see the panel gaps, and you see the resprays and you see the rust. And that's like a Turek tweet here. He says, has this tweet, well, God can't prevent all evil because that would require him from annihilating everybody. That's a good 10 footer. It sounds good as a pithy statement on social media. The moment you begin to unpack it and analyze and reflect on it, it just falls apart. Now, the interesting thing is, this is this is a bigger problem than just a bad tweet. This is about a whole aisle of apologetics in which you equip people with superficial answers to deep questions. Answers that are meant to shut down the questioner with a deflection, with a good 10-footer response that sounds good because it's pithy, concise, and impactful. But if you take any time to reflect on it, it's going to fall apart. Now, these kinds of pithy responses to deep problems, like the problem of evil and suffering in the world, can be very effective for large tracts of your audience because you have a large lay audience that is not going to think hard and deep and long about these difficult questions. They want an answer that you can share in a minute or two that they can memorize and then just repeat if the question is presented to them. For those people, I mean, these may seem to be intellectually satisfying, but they're not satisfying in the sense of actually being good answers. And when you get people who are thinking hard about these questions and they get an answer like this, well, if God were to prevent all evil, that would just require him to annihilate everybody, including you and me. They're going to see through that with no problem. And that is only going to go to discredit further the apologists and the church more widely because people can see that this is not a community that is interested in seriously wrestling with very deep, difficult questions like the problem of evil and suffering in the world. Rather, they want to give pithy, ultimately indefensible or trivial answers that fall apart upon closer inspection, like a 10-footer, and which show that this community is not as interested in truth as they purport to be. And that becomes a serious problem. So you might think with a pithy answer like this to the problem of evil and suffering that you win a battle, but you do ultimately lose the war.